tell our listeners a little bit about your stance, the party stance, the vaccines, the mandatory this, the mandatory that, all of that good stuff. How did you guys feel about the medical issues, medical freedom, and the stuff surrounding this
pandemic
plague that we've all suffered through?
So we are entirely against the mandates, the lockdowns, all of that. We think that if you look at how we got to this being as big of a disaster as it was in the first place. It actually started with another government that tried to bury it instead of addressing it as soon as they could. And we can speculate as to why they did that, because they didn't do it with SARS, but they did it with this one. But the Chinese government, for whatever reason, decided to try to bury the fact that COVID was happening. So then, by the time we found out about it, our government found out about it sometime in either as early as September or October or as late as November or December, when the first news articles were coming out that the rest of us could read about it. The first response they had was to keep in place the CDC regulations that banned testing for new diseases without going through months of testing to make sure that the tests work. So you literally had American companies making COVID-19 test kits and shipping them all overseas because it was illegal to use them here. And so we went then from that to, once it was obvious through a bunch of illegal testing that was being done at universities and teaching hospitals that it was obviously here and spreading, and it was being released to the news, then you had governors throughout the country who were doing, mandating that nursing homes and mental health facilities take COVID patients, knowing that they had no wherewithal to try to stop their most vulnerable people in the country, the people most likely to die from COVID, from immediately getting COVID at a time when they had no idea what the treatment protocols were, which led to the crisis and disaster that led them to then implement the 2005 bird flu pandemic guidelines that were put in place by Anthony Fauci under the guidance of George Bush for a virus that had a 90% fatality rate. And that is what got us here. So that is what led to so many people believing that if we just stayed 6 feet away from each other by law and stayed in our houses and ignored the crushing poverty and increases in rates of suicide and depression and drug addiction relapse and spousal abuse and every other terrible thing, an entire lost generation of kids who teaching 6-year-olds by Zoom as if that's going to work. All of the ancillary damage that was done as a result of telling the entire world, playing red light, green light with their lives, was somehow going to stop a virus that spread more easily than the flu. It was because of fear that they even did that in the first place. Yeah. We would have never done that to them. We would have been honest, upfront, and open with them about what to expect, what not to expect, and not have the hubris of saying, we know exactly what to do, and if you don't do it, you're a bad person who's making this work. Instead saying, this is what we think would be smart for people to do. We are learning as we go, and we will update you as we can. You ultimately have to make the best choices for yourself. We would have still had a pandemic. People would have still died. I don't think it would have been anywhere near as bad, and it certainly would have created all the other messes that happen. And when it comes to the vaccine mandate, government has no business telling you that you need to put something in your body in order to be able to work at a job, especially one that has nothing to do with healthcare. Right. And even in healthcare, we're now seeing the result of that. They told healthy, unvaccinated healthcare workers, you can't work in healthcare anymore because you won't get vaccinated for COVID.
You were a hero last year. This year, you
were a hero. Now you're a jerk and you're a prick and you're the reason why this thing is spreading. We now are in the reality where vaccinated healthcare workers who have active COVID infections are being told, we have a shortage of workers. You need to come into work.
Yeah, I will say this, and this is once again another good little piece of info in case you hadn't already heard it, but you're here in Washington State, so you may have. State Representative Jesse Young was in here and was passionate in letting us know, hey, look, the last year, Washington State was shutting down all the businesses and everything. 2% growth. 2% growth on the revenue generated by the state. All the big box stores, everybody had to go to them, right? Amazon. Shut down the mom and pop stores, but Amazon, Walmart, Costco, you just go to those stores, right?
Yeah. So Boeing making a fortune with new contracts. Yeah.
So it was, and he pointed out, he's like, it's one of the biggest wealth transfers in history. Nobody's saying a word.
Yes.
Not a word.
Literally, and it was probably the biggest thing I was screaming during the 2020 elections and moving forward from there is just that. We saw the largest transfer of wealth, not just in the U.S., but in the developed world. And it was almost exclusively from the lower quadrant to a very small handful. I mean, we talk about the 1%. This is more like the 0.001%.
Yeah.
A handful of tens of thousands of people across the planet who own most things already.
It's almost as if they'd scripted it out. I'm not Alex Jones, but like seriously.
Oh, they scripted out how to. So they didn't script out COVID.
Right.
What they scripted out is when a disaster happens, how do we take advantage of it to the maximum effect?
Yeah.
Which is why, again, these protocols that were used by both Republicans and Democrats under the guidance of a CDC that was under the purview of a Republican president, using guidelines from a Republican president from 2005. They were using guidelines that were written for the bird flu if it started spreading from person to person and came to the U.S. The bird flu kills 9 out of 10 people who get it.
Yeah.
They used those kind of guidelines for a virus that's probably anywhere from 0.5% to 1% fatality rate.
And who was the one guy in Congress who spoke up was the very Libertarian / Republican Rand Paul, right?
Yep.
I mean, he was really outspoken in his attacks on Fauci and everything else. And I found it hard to take exception to anything he was out there saying. I was like, yep, you go for it. But he's one guy. You know,
he's one guy.
And it was like he made good sound bites and little YouTube videos and great conversation pieces on Fox, MSNBC, and CNN. But those are all paid monopolistic shills. They're all making money for posting this stuff.
And let me go back a little bit deeper. Yes, he went after Fauci and with beautifully the things that he said. I wish he had gone after Fauci's boss with the same level of attack. Problem is, Fauci's boss was Donald Trump.
I was going to say, wait, the president is... I still to this day can't... My wife and I just had this conversation, and I was explaining to her how, as a previous Trump supporter, how I had gone through the steps of losing a lot of respect and patience because she'd asked me, oh, are you going to support him again if he runs? I said, I hope somebody else runs. And she was like, wait, what?
$7 trillion of debt. Standing by as the CDC, quote-unquote, guides, basically coerces the states through their lockdown regime, attacking Republican governors who ended their lockdowns earlier than he wanted them to, and blaming them for the deaths in those states, implementing more gun control regulations through the ATF than the last 4 presidents before him, cheerleading for red flag laws, which violate the First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment. I mean, you want to talk about violating people's rights. Literal swatting by government, and he cheerled for him. Take the guns first, due process later. If I hadn't already moved from the Republicans to the Libertarians, Donald Trump would have made me do so.